Bless this grave. His mother and I had talked out as best we could the funeral arrangements, and she had wanted me to be there when he reached that point where he would leave this earth. And I agreed on the condition that he would want it, not his mom. Even though, it wasn't exactly something that I looked forward to. I guess there was a level of me hoping that he wouldn't want me there, in my own weakness, which I suppose I'm entitled to. Been back in Texas with Stuart's mother, Nora, and his sister Kay at the house on Lake Travis reminded me too of how it was at the end a year ago now. After my first visit to Stuart, I had gone back to New York to continue my work with AIDS Ministry. So I was here around this time last year, and I got a message on the answering service from Kay that Stuart was fading fast. Would I go out? So I called and asked, did he want me? And she said, yes, he has asked for you. So I took a plane immediately and arrived into the hospital around 12 midnight. And he was there, still conscious. And I went to him and I said, it's me.
When my brother was in the hospital, he came in and talked to us about what Christ was all about. My sister, who is a very fundamentalist believer, had a real hard time. Stuart was gay, and we felt, well, my sister especially felt like if she were to love our brother who was gay, then she would be deserting her love for God. And if she were to love God, that she had to desert her brother because he was gay. And Bernard showed us, as well as so many of the nurses in the hospital who were having some of the same questions because we were all of so many different beliefs, that really the whole idea behind Christianity is that if we love our brother, then we love God. If we love God, then we love our brother, whether we're gay or heterosexual.
And he fought from that time until 6:30 p.m. the following day to hang on to life. And you could literally see every function in his body closing down. Up a lung. I now know that he knew we were there, even when he lost consciousness. Call it intuition, if you will. And his mom would stroke him, and his sisters would stroke him, and I would stroke him, kiss his feet, because the feet are so sensitive when a person is dying of AIDS. The kaposi seems to affect the feet in an excruciating way. And eventually he, after a long, hard struggle, he expired. And he looked like a bloated pig on the bed. What remained of him?
It is part of our tradition to have an anniversary Mass, not that we want to remember the pain, and suffering, and sorrow that we endured together very much this time, almost to the hour last year, and indeed long before it. But we remember Stuart at this time because we believe that in Christ it is his birthday. The day of his death is the day of his birth into new life. So it's an occasion of joy, as indeed it is of sorrow, because we miss him.
He was my heart. I adored him. I don't think anyone can understand how much I miss him. Except for Bernard, I think he understands.
When Stuart died, before Stuart died, his bones were in terrible pain, and we used to give him foot rubs and back rubs and leg rubs, which seemed to help the pain. When Stuart died, I remember thinking I'll never give anyone else a foot rub or a leg rub. I remember thinking I'll never go back to Seton Hospital. They were so kind and so wonderful, but I felt I can't ever go back there. I thought I could never go back to the room where Stuart died, where Bernard, Kay, and I and other friends spent a long vigil as Stuart was dying, and where Bernard gave the last rites to Stuart. To my surprise, I find myself doing hospital visits almost every day to AIDS patients who are lonely or who enjoy having visitors. I found myself giving leg rubs and back rubs to a patient who is dying of AIDS in the room and perhaps in the bed where Stuart died, and it's okay. I didn't think I would have the strength, I suppose that's the word, to do that. But once I had done it, and I think through Bernard I have learned that you cannot walk around fear or pain. You've got to walk right through it, and you've got to feel it. So I went knowing that I was going to feel it and that it would hurt. Surprisingly, it didn't hurt nearly as much as I thought it would. I found that my focus was on another young man who was dying of AIDS. I know what it's like for other mothers and fathers, particularly mothers, because I am a mother who lost my son. I have the privilege of spending a lot of my time talking with mothers whose boys are dying of AIDS. But I do remember that I wished I had another mother who I could talk to, who I could cry with, because there's a lot of crying in there that you try to squash, because you don't want your boy to know that your pain, or that he might interpret that your pain is because of his illness and therefore because of him. So you try to spare your boy that pain. But it's pretty hard to suppress what you're feeling for so many months. You have to go out and you have to release the pain. I feel a living presence, although Stuart's body is dead. I feel his living presence rather than the empty black hole which was within me when Stuart first died. That time was as though any light that was within me had been eclipsed. Now there is a little light, and the more I work with people who are suffering from AIDS, the more light seems to come within.
I feel that Stuart, like Jimmy and others, are the spirit of Jesus Christ in which I now live and go on, hoping against hope. That God is love, no matter what. AIDS or no AIDS. Noel, I recently had the opportunity of spending some time in London, and of course I was anxious to find out what was happening in ministry to people with AIDS. It's a very different position from that in New York. There have not been many deaths so far, and consequently the consciousness is at a different level. During my stay, I met a young Irish guy called Pat, PWA, a person with AIDS. He is full-blown, and we chatted about the church and its response to the crisis. What would you like to say to me as a priest in the church who is committed to working with PWAs? What message would you like me to take as a church person to the larger structure that has so much voice in the world?
I would like you to take simply the message that let he who is out without sin cast the first stone.
And what would you want of the church in light of that?
Basically, that instead of squabbling over whether or not homosexuality is right or wrong, get down to the main issue of fighting and helping governments to take this moral aspect from around AIDS. The important thing is to find out how to cure it and how to deal with it. And if that means condoning the use of condoms or condoning anything which could possibly reduce the spread, they must do it. Because they haven't got the time to play around with dogmas and institutionalization. People are dying while they're arguing.
I was delighted to get the opportunity of meeting with Jim Cotter, the Anglican priest who dedicated his recent booklet on AIDS to Bill Kirkpatrick and myself. Bill is a fellow priest of the Anglican Communion, ministering to the AIDS community in London. I have been touched by people with AIDS in a way that has been the most holy of experiences in my life. It is a unique privilege beyond description. It is like any profound experience that the only way you can describe it is by experiencing it. You can only point to it. And with all, it's amazing that I sit here after seeing so many suffer and die, and I can say with my heart, thanks be to God for allowing me to be part of that. I hate that we have AIDS and what the price that people have to pay.
To me, it's been one of the most creative experiences I've ever been involved in, spiritually creative. It makes you open up, it exposes your own vulnerability, so you can meet that person who is dying in that vulnerability. The man who I held in my arms, who was like, I thought of him as Christ because he looked like many of the statues you saw of Christ. There's just bones. There was nothing else left, disfigured bones and blotches. And when I looked at this young man of 19, I couldn't help but weep, because, and yet somehow in some strange way, I felt so honored to be there, that I was allowed to participate in his creativity. I mean, he was being created for a new life, and probably in a very strange way, but to me I thought, well, he is growing towards his resurrection. And I felt, yes, he is going to life, he is not going to die. Although in our terms, he was dying. And in fact, he died 3 hours later. But it's that and the whole creativity of bringing out people's compassion in a way that I have never seen it before. I think the gay community, which at the moment seems to be mainly the gay community ones involved in, are teaching us again how to bring compassion back into care, how to bring the spirit back into spirituality, what it means to be human.
You know, I've had to grow up real quick because there's no time. There's no time to talk about the will of God in theological, dogmatic, and doctrinal terms when your brother is dying and he needs you. You do it, you know, and in the doing of it, you find it.
The people I've chatted to in what one might call spiritual terms, they don't talk about Jesus, they don't talk about God, they talk about the mystery, they talk about the beauty, they talk about the depth of life. And I like the way you express the vows, because I think this is true. I think the vows has come alive to me in a way that never have before, that you live your life to the fullest now. It doesn't, you just abandon, you let go and say, okay, God, it really is over to you. Not only for the person who is suffering or dying, but also for you who are trying to care for that person with all your own frailties and weaknesses, and perhaps some fear in it too about whether you really are listening to this person, whether you really are being of any use at all to this person.
Here we are before an illness for which at present there is no known cure. And your own powerlessness, you know, you're literally in the company of absolute and utter mystery here. You cannot be in control. You know, we are literally flung on God, and we're saying, you know, Jesus, you know, have mercy on us.
You're both, compared with most people, in very isolated and very frontline positions on it. I get the feeling a bit more behind the lines, as it were, on this, that in fact a lot of people are being very profoundly affected, who are certainly the second circle, which is family, friends, colleagues, lovers of those who are suffering. It was a particularly profound effect. But even then, just widening that out, the very fact that on, I mean, just as one example of it, that on British television there's been more discussion about matters of sex and sexuality over the last year than ever before, and in a way that would have been undreamt of even 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, that is an openness, and just a sheer opening of many eyes to basic facts that one thinks are well known but actually aren't.
Here in New York, it is impossible for me to imagine life without AIDS at this point, as much as